In this video, I will show you how to install your rear brake lines on your rear Dana 41 axle. Going over all the various components for the rear brake line installation. At the very bottom of the board, we have the left rear brake line. The left rear brake line will be installed on the left side of the rear Dana 41 axle. The right rear brake line is pre-installed on the rear Dana 41 axle, as this brake line support clamp has to be installed while doing the rear differential housing gasket work, as this bolt does have gasket sealant on the threads of the bolt to prevent oil migration up the threads. Also make sure to pre-install the axle T-bracket while doing the differential housing cover gasket work, as these two bolts do have gasket sealant on them to prevent oil migration up the threads. Watch this video to learn how to do the axle differential housing cover gasket work. A 3/8 inch wrench will be used to tighten all ends on the left and right rear brake lines. Moving up the board, we have the rear brake hose. This is a 16-inch long hose, and there also will be a brake hose copper washer used to tighten this end of the brake hose that will not be attached to the frame of the Jeep, which will install directly to your brake hose T-fitting on this end where my finger points. And the brake hose T-fitting is used to attach the left and right rear brake lines to the T-fitting for splitting the brake fluid between both ends. And then to tighten the brake hose T-fitting, there will be a 1/4 inch bolt used. This is 1 inch long coarse thread with lock washer. And to tighten this bolt, we'll use a 7/16 inch socket and a ratchet. The brake hose T-fitting will be mounted to the axle T-bracket, already pre-mounted to the differential housing, and it'll use this thread on the top of the T-bracket using that bolt. Finally, moving to the top left of the board, we have the brake line clamp. The brake line clamp will be used to hold the left rear brake line in place on the left side of the rear Dana 41 axle, located where my hand is approximately. Working on the threads that go into the wheel cylinder, we will just have to stick in the brake line into the hole on the wheel cylinder, just pushing it all the way in, and then thread the threads into the wheel cylinder. It should go on easily. If it's not, don't strip the threads. Now use your 3/8 wrench to fully tighten the threads on the brake line. Once you feel the threads bottom out, you want to go 1/8 to a 1/4 turn more, just to ensure we have a good seal on the brake line so no fluid leaks. One note, do not over tighten this, as it will strip out, then it will leak. The next step is to install the right rear brake line. It only can be installed one direction. The steeper angle, where my finger points, goes towards the wheel cylinder side, while the less steeper angle goes towards the axle T-bracket that's mounted to the differential housing. The next step is to install the wheel cylinder side on your brake line, and to do so, just insert the brake line into the hole on the wheel cylinder, and then just align the threads until they catch. If it's not catching, stop, because it does go in easy. And once again, when you feel the threads bottom out, use your 3/8 wrench to go 1/8 to a 1/4 turn more to ensure a good seal. The next step is to install the brake hose T-fitting. This T-fitting will allow brake fluid to be transferred between the left and right brake line, and you want to install it so the hole for the bolt will be facing towards you, and the port for the rear brake hose will be installed towards the inside of the Jeep when your axle is installed. And to install this, you want to align the port with the right brake line first, as this brake line is attached to the differential housing. And to do so, just line the threads up and thread in your brake hose. The thread should go in easy. If it's not, please stop and do not over tighten or strip these threads out, because it is brass. Lastly, the left rear brake line has to be installed into the brake hose T-fitting. Just insert the brake line into the axle T-fitting, pushing it all the way in, and then we'll align the threads. You may have to maneuver the right brake line just to get the threads to align. Make sure these threads go in easy. They will go in easy. If they're not, please stop. You don't want to strip these threads out. Before we fully tighten these threads, next insert the bolt through your brake hose T-fitting just to have this secure so we can put pressure on to tighten these threads more. Install the 1/4 inch, 1 inch long coarse thread bolt with lock washer through the hole on the brake hose T-fitting, installing on the threads where my finger points on the axle T bracket. And we'll just insert the bolt through the brass T-fitting and then line the threads. You may have to maneuver both sides just to get the thread started. Now use your 7/16 inch socket to tighten down the bolt on your brake hose T-fitting and make sure you have this fitting square with your axle T bracket and in straight line to the rear for your brake hose. And now we'll just tighten this until it is snug. Do not over tighten this bolt as this fitting is brass and it is very soft metal. The brake hose T-fitting is now secured to the axle T bracket that's secured to your axle housing. And now we can fully tighten the threads on our left and right brake line. Now use your 3/8 wrench to tighten the threads all the way until they bottom out first. And once again, tighten the threads until they're 1/8 to 1/4 turn past bottom out to ensure there's a good seal on your brake hose T-fitting. The final step with the brake line installation is we have to install the brake line clamp that goes over the axle on the left brake line that will hold the left brake line in place. There's only one clamp used and it's on the left side, and this is how I've done it. Install the brake line clamp going over the axle and over the brake line, and I've centered it between the leaf spring mount and the differential housing, and I've modified this bracket. I have bent a standoff on the bracket so the line does not make contact with the axle and just looks cleaner. And now we will have to bend the clamp over the axle and secure with a bolt. The reproduction brake line clamps are not the same as the originals, and then after building the standoff, we now have to modify the bolt. You have to make the bolt a 2-inch long bolt, and we will have to make a small bend in the bolt to allow it to curve around the axle. And then we'll just have a washer on the top and a washer on the bottom and a lock washer and a nut. With the bolt now tightened, the brake line clamp over the axle is now installed. The last step is to install the rear brake hose. This is a 16-inch long hose, and make sure the end with the nut side is threaded into the brake hose T-fitting. Before threading on the rear brake hose, make sure to install the brake hose copper crush washer on this end with the nut side. This will prevent further brake leaks. With the brake hose copper crush washer on the threaded side that will go into the brake hose T-fitting, install it onto the threads, and then we'll just thread it right onto the axle T-fitting. Use a 5/8 inch wrench to tighten, and then we'll go 1/8 to 1/4 turn past the threads bottoming out to ensure the crush washer is fully crushed and it's a good seal. And that's how you fully install the rear brake lines on the rear Dana 41 axle. Thanks for watching and subscribe.